Hello and welcome to Before Our Friends Die. You're joined by me, Kavan.
Me, Rash.
And this is the podcast where we have the conversations we want to have before we leave this planet. This week we're joined by a very, very special set of guests. One of them is my former lecturer when I studied my sociology degree, Associate Professor Jane Pilcher, and she is joined by Hannah Deakin-Smith from the Nottingham Trent University. It's really a pleasure to have them here today to discuss a topic which is close to our hearts. You know, Rachel and I have names that are often, how should we say it? Butchered.
100%.
Mispronounced.
Yep.
Said wrong.
100%.
Spelt wrong.
Yeah.
How does it make you feel?
I get Rachel a lot.
You get Rachel?
Yeah, I get Rachel a lot. That's why for the past couple of years when I started or finished uni, like professional job, I just went with Rash.
Wow.
Yeah, but we'll get to that, I guess.
So how does that make you feel?
To me, it doesn't really faze me, to be honest.
Okay.
No, it doesn't really faze me.
Interesting. Well, that's what we're here today to discuss. And without further ado, let's go.
Yeah.
So, thanks for joining us, Jane and Hannah. Really, really appreciate it. First of all, how are you both doing? Jane, we'll start with you. Good.
Yeah, good, thank you.
Wicked. So, like I said at the start, this episode is a personal one for us. We both have names that people tend to mispronounce, all the time. As recently as today at work, my name got butchered once or twice. So let's start with you, Jane. What is your name, and what does it mean?
So my name is Jane Pilcher. So Jane being my first name, Pilcher being my kind of surname or family name, as it's sometimes called. So Jane has a meaning derived from the name John. So Jane is technically a feminine form of John, and John itself derives from a Hebrew name which means something like grace of God. But I'm sure none of those were reasons why I was called Jane. It was just when I was born in 1965, Jane was a top 10 name for girls, and I think that's why my parents probably chose it. It was kind of like, a trend at that time.
Yeah.
My surname is what's known as an occupational surname because it derives from like way back. Apparently Pilcher, a pilcher was a person who cleaned and scraped animal skins. So a pilch was an animal skin. So somewhere back in the distant past, my relatives were scrapers of animal skins, which is a bit ironic given that I'm now vegetarian. But, years have passed since then, so I kind of got to let that one go.
Hannah, what can you tell us about your name?
So I'm Hannah Deakin-Smith, Hannah being my first name or forename, which means grace, which I'm not sure I particularly relate to hugely. My surname's Deakin is my maiden name or my sort of first family name, which is again an occupational name, which I think it's related to deacon, officer of the church. And then my married name, Smith, is again occupational blacksmith. So my name on my passport, driving license and everything is Hannah Smith, my married name. And for anything work-wise, I am Hannah Deakin-Smith, which interestingly I changed once I started working with Jane and thought about my own name a lot more. So I sort of reverted to and double-barreled my name. So I'm either Hannah Deakin-Smith or Hannah Smith. I answer to any of them.
Wow. Do you know what? I don't think I've ever explored the meaning of either of my names in such depth, but it feels really powerful is the word I want to use, to know the history of your name. So talking of names, both of your surnames seem to link to occupations, which is quite interesting. Do surnames mean anything anymore? And the reason I ask that is because if we go into popular culture a little bit, Kanye West has previously said that he changed his name to just Kanye, or now I think it's just Ye. He doesn't, acknowledge his surname, and even me myself. So I have quite a unique first name, and I thought to myself, I kind of just want to have that. I don't really care about the rest. No offense to my family members, etc. But I wanted to just keep my first name, and that's not really possible in this society, I don't think. But yeah, does surnames mean anything anymore? Because for me, my first name is the most important one.
Sure, I think you knocked it on the head there in as much as if you're a celebrity of a certain standing, you can get away with being one name. You're like Beyonce, for example, Madonna, for example. You can get away with that. But even somewhere in the realities of those people's lives, they will have documents which they've got to have a surname. Most countries, not all of them, there are variations around the world, but most countries, particularly in the West, will have a requirement that you have a two-part name, a forename and a surname. So surnames do continue to matter. If we go back to, I was talking about occupational surnames, they kind of derived because people didn't have surnames way back when. So you were John the Pilcher, that you were kind of marked by what you did, or John the Blacksmith or something. So, that's why there's so many Smiths, Hannah, is because there were so many Smiths of various sort of occupations like blacksmiths.
Wow.
And it's only really with the development of modern societies, the growth in population that you get with industrialization and so on, the growth in the kind of state and the need of the state to manage the population, to administer the population, the growth in private property. So it becomes important to trace families' properties and families' wealth and ownership. It's only really as we get to modern societies that surnames come into play for everybody. So in some ways, you wanting to kind of discard your name is like going back to pre-modern times in some ways.
I thought I was being original, but it turns out someone done it way before me. The study of names is onomastics, if I pronounced that right.
That's right.
And that means the study of the history and origin of proper names, especially personal names. So, Hannah, you mentioned that you began to delve into your own name once you started working with Jane. What was that journey into studying this for you?
For me, I started off looking at international student experiences of mobility, particularly, and as well their experiences. And that came from, I had spent some time studying abroad in my younger years, so that sort of influenced that. And then continued doing research in that area. And then the project came up with Jane that was student pronunciation of names, and it sort of linked there that I think I wrongly assumed it would mostly be international students that we would be looking at. So went for this job, was lucky enough to get it, and then sort of became, I think Jane calls herself a name nerd, so I think I'm going to become her sort of honorary name nerd, and sort of got more interested in it. And then continued working on other projects with Jane about depot name changes, and now another project looking at adoption and names. So sort of started with international students and have now found myself properly in the names research world.
I love that. And Jane, what was your journey into this? Because I don't know if that is my own naivety I'm about to expose here, but when I learned from you at Leicester, names, I remember you focused on age and gender, but names didn't spring to mind. Also, I remember you recommended, and I must say this to the listeners, you recommended a book that changed your life, was Housewife by Anne Oakley. And since then, I read that book and I found it really, really fascinating. So thanks for the recommendation. But yeah, I don't remember the names connection. So where did that come from?
No, sure. So, I mean, you mentioned about sociology of age as one of my kind of interests when I was teaching you, and gender. And it's really those two things that led me to think about names, partly based on my own experiences. So as a child, my parents got divorced and my mum remarried, and she said, oh, well, you can have the new surname of your new stepdad, 11, 12-year-old. You think, yeah, okay. By the time I got to 14, I thought, no, don't want that. Go back to my birth surname. And then fast forward to when I had my own kids, partly out of my kind of gender interest, I thought, well, I don't want my children just to have their father's surname. I want them to have my surname as well. So my kids have got double-barreled names, so they're called Pilcher May. It just got me thinking about names and gender and identity, and why is it that women, tend to change their surnames when they marry a man? It's not the law that you do that, but something like 95% of women, even today, who marry a man, change their surname. Why? What does it say about names and belonging to a family and gender relations and gender identities? So that's kind of how I got into it as a personal journey. I began looking at it in terms of, how do children get their surnames and why, particularly when couples aren't married to each other. What happens then? Does it make a difference? What surname does the child get? And from there, I got interested in the gender kind of manifestations of naming. And then, as Hannah said, I became a complete name nerd. And I've just dived into it completely and find all aspects of it now fascinating, from issues around, pronunciation of names and what that does to students' identities, which is one of the projects I've worked on, to why people change their names using deed polls, which is a kind of semi-legal way of changing your name, to what happens to names when people are adopted or people adopt a child, what kind of naming decisions get made and why, in those kinds of contexts when families are kind of being remade through a process of adoption.
I'm intrigued. So you mentioned loads of things there that piqued my interest a little bit. So what were some of the findings that you did find in terms of parents that aren't married, and what sort of surnames do the kids take on? But also, if I reflect on my own experiences, I've had 2 family weddings in the last 6 months. One of them, they ended up with a double-barreled name, and my family members looked around the room when that was announced like, did you know? Did you know? Did you know? So that was quite interesting. And then the other one took just the male's name. So it was very interesting to see the difference in both of their relationships, and the power transaction, if you will. What did you find in terms of parents that aren't married?
There's one of the things about names is hardly anyone studies them. I'm like almost, not quite, but almost the only person doing it in the UK, and one of the few people doing it around the world. It's still quite a new area of sociology. But having said that, there is a study in America which showed that, amongst couples where they weren't married, where they'd had a child, 97% of those children were given the surname of the father only. So, children belong to men if we're using surnames as a marker. And women don't kind of own children in the same way through a surname as men do. That's
wild when you consider the whole 40 weeks worth of work that the woman puts in to rear said child. Yeah, that is very wild, actually.
Yeah, I was going to mention as well, you looked in names regarding the gender. How about culture and religion? Because if I get married, my wife wouldn't have my surname. She would keep her dad's.
Yeah, sure.
Have you ever looked into that type of thing?
Yeah, sure. So that kind of gendered naming conventions aren't global. Even in the UK, not all ethnic groups practice that kind of naming convention. And it's really interesting to recognise that what's the kind of majority practice isn't the practice for everybody, even in one country. So certainly around naming conventions, you have some societies in the world where, some states, I think in Quebec, for example, in Canada, women are not allowed to take legally, they're not allowed to take their husband's name. Wow. In other places around the world, you have to take your husband's name. In some religions you do, and in some religions you don't. I mean, I've talked about gender and surnames, but, in many countries around the world, somebody's gender or their sex is indicated by the name that they're given. So Jane is like, typically would show that the person with that name is a woman or a girl. But other cultures don't have that kind of gender specific naming practices, and a name can be given equally to people of different genders. So there is a great deal of variation.
A few names like Jordan, like I know like a male, female true. Jordan.
Yeah,
When did that become a thing? Or I don't know. When did a name become someone's identity? Like it just proves that they're a male or they're a female. When did that become a thing? Or how does that work?
So hard to trace back. I mean, historically, people have wanted to signal, at least if we're thinking about the context of the UK, people have wanted to signal what their baby is. It's a boy. We look at we look at a baby's genitals. The doctor or the nurse will say, well, it's a boy, it's a girl. Once that kind of declaration has been made about who they are, then the parents will make that kind of decision about what to call their child based on the kind of declaration of whether it's a boy or a girl. So if we look in the UK, each year, the Office of National Statistics publishes the annual list of baby names based on registrations at birth. You have to go and register your child, and you have to put the name of your child down. That Office of National Statistics list is divided into boys' names and girls' names. They don't do a separate list for gender neutral names.
Right.
Because still it's very strong in the UK that names are given for boys or for girls, and there are very few gender neutral names.
Just out of interest then, are you getting any senses that that's going to change anytime soon?
I think it is beginning to change, but it's not a trend still. It's not like a bang on trend, but there are one of the most popular gender neutral names in the UK is River, for example. Almost equal number of baby boys and baby girls last year who were, there were about 500 boys called that name and about 500 girls called that name, River.
Wow.
It's a nice name.
Yeah, lovely.
Yeah. It doesn't immediately make you think of a boy or a girl. It works really well as a gender neutral name, but it's not a big trend. You're still going to be pretty much the only kid in your town probably called River, let alone in your school or in your class. So
Hannah, if we can come to you, what is the link between names and our identities then? I read I think it was one of your papers, Jane, you can they identify with someone's body. What does that mean?
I think you'd probably better ask me that one.
Yeah, I'll pass it on to you then, Jane.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I'll just be quoting Jane's paper, so it's probably best to just go to Jane.
I've made an argument that we need to think about the strong links that there are between our bodies and our identities and our names. So, Jane Pilcher, you think that would be, Pilcher's not a very common surname. Okay, it's pretty unusual. Jane's a pretty common forename for women my age, say. Put the two together, you think, there can't be that many Jane Pilchers about. And, if you put Jane Pilcher into Google, you actually come up with a lot of Jane Pilchers who've lived historically in the past. And, there's a fair few Jane Pilchers around now. So using just my name doesn't identify me as a unique individual person, okay? What identifies me as a unique individual person is my name as it's applied to my body and my face. So you think about how important identity cards are, okay? So you've probably got one you need a card to get into work. It's probably got your picture on it. It's got your name on it too. And it's the combination of the two that authorize your identity and validate your identity. It's the same with passports, for example. So we have to think, I think, not just about names and identity, but about names, bodies and identities as well, because that's what makes it work. That's what makes names work effectively as an identifier when it's attached to somebody's body.
That makes sense.
So I saw on the news, was it today or yesterday? My days are all blurred in. Madonna was at the Grammys the other day, and she looked recognisable to me, but the headline is Madonna looks unrecognisable. That's the headline. She's still Madonna. That's the name. The body has changed over time. Is that significant in any way? Or is that just popular culture doing its thing, making a big thing out of it?
She's still Madonna. One of the reasons why we have to update our passports every 10 years or something is precisely because we're not going to look the same. Our bodies are not going to look the same over time, and so you still got the same name, or you may have the same name, but it's that body name combination that needs revalidating through our passports. To make that passport an effective way of identifying who we are.
So Hannah, if we can pick up with you. I know you said your speciality was international names. Now I'm really interested in nicknaming and international students. I've met a few in my time at work who I say, unfortunately, right, and maybe that's my own value judgment on it, but they've produced nicknames to try and fit in because their given name they have deemed to be too difficult to go forth with, sort of thing. What are your reflections on that? Any experience with that? Any insights?
Yeah, I think with the students that we spoke to, we didn't just speak to international students. We just spoke to any students who had issues with pronunciation of their names. Some were quite sort of traditionally English names that they still struggled with. So it was a mixture, but definitely some of the international students, there was sort of a division where some people would choose a shortened version of their name for ease. And in some ways, one student comes to mind who actually chose a shortened version of their Polish name, and they did describe it as them being able to disguise the fact that they were Polish. They didn't actually want people on first sight of seeing their name, like lecturers, people they were emailing, other students, to initially think they were Polish. They hadn't had particularly negative experiences, but they were definitely using that strategy as a way of disguising who they were and their identity. So people do definitely do that, but they saw that as quite a positive thing. They were here for studying and they wanted to fit in. They didn't want to have to constantly sort of explain themselves or their name or how to pronounce their name. They used it as quite a positive, empowering thing to do. Whereas other students came across, some Chinese students particularly did choose shortened versions or English versions of their name for ease of others. That definitely was the case. And it's difficult because when you would sort of ask people, would you want to be called your real name or your full name? Some of them did say yes and would like that, but a lot of them lacked the confidence to actually enforce that upon people, particularly people in university who hierarchically were sort of difficult to challenge. And so you're getting my name wrong in a group situation at university. So a lot of the time people just let it slide and thought, it's fine as long as they're referring to me as something close to my name. We heard that a lot, I'll just accept it. But when you talk to people further, sometimes it does bother them more than they would let on, and would rather be called their real name rather than a nickname or a version that they've come up with for ease. So yeah, that is definitely something we've come across. And also people changing the ordering of their name to fit the cultural norms here, and they might not be comfortable with it, but they will allow themselves to be referred to it for ease and to fit in. So it's definitely something we came across, but there were definitely different opinions of it. Some people wanted to do it and some people didn't really feel comfortable doing it.
Go ahead.
That's what I pretty much did as well, to be honest, because I think since school, everyone's been saying my name wrong, and I just went with it, because my name's, you're meant to pronounce it as Rachel, but I always got Rochelle or pretty much Rochelle, and it's not really my name, to be honest. Yeah, I never deeped it too much, to be honest.
I feel guilty now.
Yeah, I do, because I do have a nice name.
So did your teachers at school get it right?
No, I think from primary school, if I had the perspective as my parents are Asian, I'm Asian. There's an Asian way of saying it, and there's an English way of saying it. And to be honest, I feel like if I not put my foot down, but if I told them how to say it properly, probably put more effort into my name for them to say it, probably turn around a bit more better, to be honest. But now, just having that comment with you there, I just thought about it. I never really tried to tell someone, "Oh, say my name properly," or I just went with it, to be honest. It makes me feel a bit sad now.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think for school children, it's, because the status of a teacher is, they're a teacher. It must be quite hard to correct any mispronunciation of name. And even in our study, we found that students at university, they're young adults, but they still found it difficult to get up the courage and be brave enough to say, actually, that's not how you say my name. This is how you say my name. So it can be a really difficult thing to challenge people, to, pointing out where they're going wrong.
And the conversation of how to say it, and then you're there for 5 minutes trying to explain this is how you say it. And it's just, I think sometimes it could be just a waste of time. So that's why I think since I finished university and went into like professional work-wise, just shortened it to Rash. Just straight Rash, easy, simple. You can't get that wrong.
Well, you'd be surprised, yeah.
Yeah.
Hannah, so you mentioned it earlier around the Polish name. I'm intrigued. Is that like a general thing? Do names generally indicate nationality, ethnicity, or is that quite a unique thing? And on top of that, why is that potentially problematic?
I think sometimes, yes, some of the students we spoke to did sort of describe their name as, it's a very Polish name or it's a very Chinese name. They thought themselves that their name would identify who they were. Some were very proud of that. And, we did come across students who really did say to people, go against that. uncomfortable conversation of, I'm sorry, you're getting my name wrong. People did try to get people to get their name right. Other students, academic staff, support staff, they did try to get people to get it right. But for other people, they did sort of think, oh, this highlights my difference, or that I'm not a home student, and did sort of not hide behind, but they did use that to disguise it. So themselves, they thought it highlighted their ethnicity. And I think in terms of when it is problematic, we definitely came across cases of that. One particular student, the story was quite shocking, really, but I think it does happen more than we probably want to admit, is that they applied for a job in a bar in London whilst they were studying. So not somewhere you would expect to come across this, and they received no reply from their CV, nothing back. Flatmate applied same day, got an interview, got the job within a week. As sort of an experiment, they sent their CV with a different name, an English name, and they got an interview the same day. And they were convinced that that was why. They raised it with the company. They obviously denied it. So I think that is definitely that. Some of the students did think they had experienced how the ethnicity of their name had been problematic for them. And there are other cases of that in the press or in other literature as well, that where that does sort of stop people getting jobs or getting interviews because of their name and what it highlights. So I guess your name giving the impression that you're from a certain ethnicity is problematic when somebody negatively takes that on and is basically racist, or you know, is negative about you because of your ethnicity.
I'm glad you cleared that up, because my question was a little bit clunky. That's what I meant to ask in asking that question. So I'm glad you teased that one out there. When we talk about that and the CVs, I think instantly back to my A-level days of Noon. There was a study by someone, I don't know their first name, funnily enough, but their last name was Noon. And they submitted however many CVs to organisations with an ethnic sounding name, and then submitted the same exact CV, same exact qualifications and experience with a non-ethnic sounding name, if that's the right way of saying it. And they received way more interview requests for the Western name, shall we say. Wild. And I think one of the critiques of that study when I was doing A-levels was, well, it's an out-of-date study. But it's not out of date. It's still our lived experiences. And I'm sure if you did that same study today, you'd find very similar outcomes. I don't know, Jane, you might want to challenge me on that one.
No, absolutely. You're right. I mean, one of the big studies that have been done in the UK was a government-funded study from the Department of Employment, which did exactly the same kind of experiment that you were talking about there, sending out CVs with different names on, but exactly the same qualifications, still skills and experiences. And it was definitely found that, you know, people with names perceived to be non-white names did much better. They got more callbacks, they got more invitations for interviews and so on. And so that was a 2009 study, and people might say, oh, well, that, you know, things have got better now. But somebody just last year or the year before did another European-wide version of that, using a similar kind of methodology, and found exactly the same. So, wow. You know, it's still happening. It's still happening out there.
And I know AI is used a lot in recruitment now, but I've seen articles that, again, even AI, which is programmed by human beings at the start, has biases towards names.
Exactly, because it's programmed by human beings at the start. People think AI is this kind of neutral entity, but it's not. It's always programmed by typically white, male, Western, you know, programmers whose biases are going to slip into whatever it is they're programming.
Yep. And you know what, it was interesting because you mentioned the Chinese names, Hannah, earlier. And my girlfriend, she's from Hong Kong, and she has an English name, she has a Mandarin name and a Cantonese name, but on her passport it includes her English name and her Cantonese name as a combination, and her parents did that so that she would have an English name and grow up with an English name. She wouldn't have to create one when she was older. It was already, you know, pre-planned for her, because they always knew she was going to interact with, you know, an English education system, etc. So it was very interesting when people, like, I don't know who to throw under the bus here, but like my friends and family would say to her, is that your real name? She'd say, yeah. And she'd almost have to pull out her passport to prove herself and say, yeah, this is name on my passport, because otherwise they'd think she had a name, a Cantonese name, that and she made up her actual name, Brittany. So yeah, that wasn't the case. And it was very interesting to see how her culture have adopted and almost prepared for this, you know, interaction. So moving on to my workplace and your workplaces, university. How does this impact your day to day? This onomastics. How does it impact your day to day working in the university? And what is good practice for staff and students? Jane, I'll go to you first.
Okay, so names, even irrespective of this issue of pronunciation of names, students' names, this is the thing we looked at. Names matter in universities already. They already seem to matter. So, for example, I don't know if you remember, way back when you were doing your sociology degree, you had to submit your work with a number and not with a name.
Yeah.
Okay. And a lot of universities do that in the UK, and that's to rule out conscious and unconscious bias by lecturers when they're marking students' work based on, oh, well, I know that person, they're good, I'll give them more marks. Or, this person's got a Sikh name or a Muslim name, unconsciously people might discriminate against, and not kind of to take the work at face value because they know who the person is who wrote it. So to that extent, names already matter in universities. And also, if you think about, there's often kind of campaigns for reading lists for students to have more women authors and more people of colour, academics of colour on reading lists, so that it's not just all about white men in terms of their kind of contribution to a discipline. And so names come into play there because we need to know the name, but we also need to know a little bit about the author. But on a day-to-day basis, obviously, students go through university in their classrooms, interacting with staff, interacting with their fellow students. And I think it's important, and I think our study shows that it's important that they feel like they belong in that learning environment. And if you're constantly being renamed through someone mispronouncing your name, or disrespecting your name in some way, deciding that your name's too difficult for them to pronounce, so come up with a completely different name for you, then, that just is not a conducive learning environment for you to feel like you belong in that learning space and you're not being othered. So that's on a daily basis throughout a student's time at university. We did a survey of universities in England in terms of whether they had any policies about ensuring that students' names get pronounced correctly. Mostly, universities don't have any policies. So we came across a few who had policies only at the point of graduation. So, a student might be asked or invited to fill out a form to sort of share how their name should be pronounced when they're being called across the stage to shake somebody's hand and kind of graduate in front of all their families and friends. But not even all universities have that. And I think it's not just important at the point of graduation when a student's basically waving bye-bye and going out the door of a university. I think it should happen from the point of registering at a university, from the point of your induction program at a university. And all staff should be trained in this issue of, respecting people's names and respecting their identities. And, it shouldn't just be something that's left to the last minute when students are graduating. And there are loads of things that universities could be doing. One of them is to encourage people to record the pronunciation of their name and attach it to your email signature. So that, we have now this sort of declaration of our preferred pronouns, and a lot of people include that in their email signatures. We should have it as a recording of our name to declare our preferred pronunciation of our name. And even though I might assume that my name, Jane Pilcher, is easy for everyone to pronounce, but that's a real, wrong assumption. A Chinese student might not know how to pronounce my name. So I have an audio recording of my name, of me saying my name in my email signature, so that people can check before they meet me and try and say my name correctly when they do so. So we need to normalise this kind of practice of including audio recordings to share our preferred pronunciation of our names.
That's fascinating. I think you said something really profound there that made me think. You said renamed. So you're constantly being renamed when your name is being said wrong. And I think that's really powerful because I've never considered it like that. But I would never let anyone rename me if they said, I'm going to rename you and I'm going to call you this.
Yeah.
But in them saying my name wrong, they are renaming me. And I think that's really powerful.
I mean, you might want to let somebody off once, but if you're with a lecturer over a whole semester or even a whole year, and that lecturer consistently and persistently says your name wrongly, that is renaming.
Yeah.
You know, that person is renaming you.
Now, I must say as well, like, so I did get that form at the end towards graduation about, getting my name correct. And it wasn't said correctly. It was I was called Kayvan Brian, I remember it. And I screen recorded it, and it's on my Instagram. And how do I put it? Even in my caption, I believe I referenced the fact that my name is spelt wrong. And even, I think before it was even like part of my thought process of how graduation is going to pan out. And I'd only through this conversation right now am I reflecting and thinking, wow, it actually took up quite a lot of my brain space in and around that graduation time, before, during, and after, because of my name. Now I'm sure on an isolated incident, that won't impact my well-being or my life, right? Quality of life. But over time, it's quite a microaggression, right? I've seen some of your work that suggests that. Hannah, do you want to go into a little bit more detail on the microaggressions?
And particularly at graduation, you've got, it's like a big rite of passage. You've got your family there, you've got your friends there. For some students, they've flown in their parents from, if they're an international student, they've flown in their parents from abroad. You get like your 30 seconds of fame across that stage, and they muck it up.
Yeah.
To be fair, though, we spoke to lecturers as well as part of our studies, some of whom had the job of preparing to say students' names for graduation. And, they do their best with the resources that they've been given, but they're just not given the right resources, and it's something that these people who read names out at graduation, they worry over so much, and they do a lot of background work off their own bat. They're not given anything.
Yeah.
And it's so sort of ad hoc and unsystematic, and in your case, unsuccessful, that, Hannah and I think that something much more kind of focused and purposeful needs to happen, particularly at the point of graduation, but as part of a whole kind of package of interventions that a university should do throughout the time of study at a university.
This is a brand new, fresh idea that I've literally just thought of as you were speaking. But what if every student introduced themselves during graduation? Not live, but did a video.
Yeah.
Saying, I'm Kayvan Brian. And obviously, if you have a long course name, that could be a long graduation, right? But I studied BA Sociology. Kayvan Brian, BA Sociology. And it's a video of me saying that. So then I get my name right, I'm on the screen, and the dean or the VC, whatever, shakes my hand, and it's all the great pompous and the show, but I said my name, and I got it right.
Yeah, that certainly would be a solution. But, there are other ways of doing it. We're in a very technological, high-tech world. Why can't the person have an earpiece in and, all people, if my kind of idea of having people say their name and attach it to their email, an audio recording of their name, all that they need to do is gather all those names, put them in the order of the person who's going to, the graduation order, and it would just be played just before that person steps on the stage. They could hear that audio recording and the person could say the name. But, your solution's another one that would work. Get the students to say their own names.
I'm going to give this podcast to the relevant team. And we're going to make some changes. We're going to make some waves.
It makes some changes, but it doesn't change the point of people saying the name wrong still.
Good point.
Yeah, it still factors that in, doesn't it?
So, okay, I'm really passionate as an individual about public sociology because, first of all, it helps validate my degree a little bit more. Sometimes people are like, oh, yes, that's about like minds and people's brains, isn't it? I'm like, no, that's psychology. Sociology, it's a lot more of a discussion. So the more public sociology we can advocate for, the better for me and my cohort, I suppose. So my question is, how much of this work on names, the onomastics, how much of it is important in academia, in sociology, in the field that you work in, Jane, and how much of that importance is transferable into our everyday lives? Now, I think we've probably answered that question throughout our conversation, but I just want you to spell it out, and particularly picking up on the microaggressions and those sorts of things. If you could spell it out why this is important, that would be fantastic.
Sure. So, we looked at students' names, pronunciation of students' names in higher education. But the lessons that we learned from our study, the findings that we had, are applicable to all walks of life. We talked earlier about primary school and secondary school, but even beyond education, in workplaces, respecting your colleagues' names. Public-facing occupations like teachers, like nurses, like social workers, like probation officers, like lawyers, police officers, and so on, interacting with the public need to have some training about respecting people's name-based identities. So, this is our project looked at education, but its findings and its kind of policy recommendations are transferable to all kind of different walks of life. It's not something that's just going to make a little bit of a wave in the university sector. We're hoping to make waves more broadly. So one of the things I'm doing, for example, is I'm beginning to do workshops, names and identities workshops. So I've delivered one, for example, recently to psychotherapists, people who have clients who they'll be talking to about their experiences. And for that kind of interaction, it's really important that you respect somebody's name, because you're often, talking in a very intimate way with somebody about their lives. And I'm hoping to kind of roll that out more broadly. One of the things that we'll be doing is in relation to our adoption and names project, we're hoping to do a workshop for social workers. In part, we'll draw upon our pronunciation of names study, as well as our particular findings around adoption and names. So yeah, we're pushing it out there as far as we can. I've written to and sent my sort of summary findings to all the kind of key players in the higher education sector. So it's not just going to stay within the university sector in terms of my university, or just encouraging lecturers to change their practices, or people who deal with graduation to change their policies. I want it to go right to the top of the kind of like management of the university sector at a national level, to see if they can begin to recognise this as an issue. Because at the end of the day, we're talking about equalities, diversity and inclusivity. This is what this comes down to. And at the moment, the way that students' names are dealt with in higher education isn't giving respect to diversity and inclusion. And it becomes an equalities issue.
So Hannah, when we say that it's an EDI issue, and we focus a lot on names that are mispronounced, why is this important for someone with a simple name? And by saying simple, I don't mean to other any other names, but my name I would say is simple, but people seem to stumble over it. But why is it important for instance, a Jane or a Hannah? Why is it important? Why is this issue important?
I think it's what Jane said earlier, is that you assume your name is easy. I looked at your pronunciation of your name before this podcast because I wouldn't have been completely confident. So, you assume, and when I was just Hannah Deakin, I used to get Deakin with a G on the end, and I would think it's such a simple name. How can you possibly get it wrong? My daughter's got really easy name, constantly gets different versions of it all the time. So, we assume that our names are easy, but to other people, they're not easy. And I think it's just about starting good practice, because if I come across someone that I struggle with their name and they can see I'm trying to help them get my name right, it sort of takes the awkwardness out of the conversation, that you're saying, this is how you say my name, right? They're more likely to then be able to tell you how you can get, you open the conversation. And I think that was one of the things that we sort of found would be helpful for university staff, is just having the conversation. You can't get everyone's name right, or that we can't teach people to know everybody's name pronunciation overnight, but it's having that sort of conversation of, am I getting it right? Please tell me if I'm not getting it right. Giving people space to correct you. And I think even if you've got a simple name, telling people how to say your name opens that conversation and makes it just good practice and more normalized in all walks of life, really.
That allyship is really important. Even if you've got a simple name, show allyship with those who you know whose name are getting mispronounced on a daily basis, and just have it in your signature. Have that audio version available too, because it really helps. There is a fantastic article actually on Wonky by Farhana Chowdhury, which I'll put in the description below of this episode. It goes into detail about some options you can do, both as someone with a name that often gets mispronounced and someone with a name that doesn't get mispronounced, to show that support and ensure that you don't mispronounce other people's names. So I'll put that in the description below. One of the things I wanted to talk about is names that have fallen in and out of favour, and we can have a bit of fun with this. Well, actually, what I'm about to say next isn't fun at all, but we can have a bit of fun with it. Moving on. One of my colleagues, when I told him that we're going to have this chat about names, he said, please ask her this question, because his name is Declan. Now, as of recently, his name has been associated with Ant and Dec. And, that comes with its own jolly connotations, and it's all well and good. However, he said in the 80s, his name was often associated with the IRA. And that posed its own problems for him in interview settings, etc. So I'm intrigued, Jane, with your history name hat on, or name history hat on, could you give us an idea of any names that have fallen in or out of favour over the years?
Yes, the kind of broader context of it is things, do go in and out of being trendy. So I said about my own name, when I was born, it's top 10. Now it's not even top 100 now for girls. Yeah. So, there's a sort of natural rhythm. I wouldn't, you wouldn't call your child after, somebody of your parents' generation. Probably you wouldn't want to do that. You want to mark a bit of difference, culturally speaking, between your tastes as a younger person and your parents' tastes, or their parents' tastes. So this means that some names do go in and out of fashion. So, as you were talking now, I was thinking about Nigel as a name. Okay.
Farage, isn't it?
Nigel Farage has probably given it a bit of a good or bad vibes, depending on your politics. But there's not very many Nigels about. And if they are, they're all kind of Nigel Farage's age. They're sort of in their 50s or 60s.
I've never met a young Nigel, that's for sure.
Yeah. Give it another 40 years, though. I reckon Nigel will be back in fashion. Because, you as a parent choosing a name for a child, you were thinking, what's a bit of an unusual name that's not sort of like, not used so much now. Oh, God, this Nigel's a good candidate. So this is why some babies now are being called names like, I don't know, let's think, Nelly. Back in Edwardian times, Nelly was a popular name for girls, but I didn't know any Nellies when I was a kid. But there are some babies and girl children in primary school now called Nelly. So there are names that become fashionable because they're sort of so unusual and they're old-fashioned, if you like. They're old-fashioned enough to become fashionable again. So that's what I would kind of answer that question with. Sometimes there are names that are associated with difficult events or upsetting events, and an example there would be Katrina. Okay, so in America, Katrina was a reasonably popular name for girls. Hurricane Katrina came along, named after, because they like to name storms after people nowadays. And guess what happened to the name Katrina? It got very unpopular. It went off a cliff because of people's associations with Hurricane Katrina. So, these are some of the factors that lead to names becoming sort of problem names or less popular names over time.
Hannah, can you think of any names that you just wouldn't see a young person walking around with today?
I mean, it's been a while since I've met a baby Gary. I saw a social media campaign a couple of years ago now that was like bring back Gary, and it was like getting people to name their babies Gary because they're going to be extinct. I think it was predicting in sort of a few years there would just be no one under the age of 20 that was called Gary. I'm not sure why, because it was very popular at one point, but yeah, Gary is the one that springs to mind.
I had a mate in primary school called Gary.
Gary?
Yeah. But instantly makes me think of EastEnders, to be honest, but Gary.
The mechanic, yeah.
Yeah, the mechanic.
I've never met, like, my grandmother's called Norma.
Yeah.
I've never met a young Norma.
Yeah. Ever.
I don't think I will either. Like,
or the equivalent, the sort of masculine equivalent of that is Norman.
Yeah.
Norman, I don't know any young Normans. I know a couple of granddads called Norman, but
so that brings us to, if you are a young Norman, a young Norma, a young Gary, email akhi&saltfish@gmail.com and get in touch and let us know you exist. But also we are available on social media at akhi&saltfish on Twitter, as well as akhi&saltfish on Instagram, and Before Our Friends Die pod on Instagram too. So make sure you get in touch. So towards the end now, I just want to get your vision, both of you, on where does this project go next? And I know it's a series of projects, but I mean names generally. Where does this go next for you? You alluded to it earlier. This is not just a NTU project. This isn't just a HE sector project. This is hopefully a public sociology, general cultural change project. So where does it go next, Jane?
Just really getting the findings out there. The pace of academic kind of life, in terms of like getting a grant and then doing the research, and then by then you've already got another grant. It means that it can be difficult to kind of keep the focus on the research that you've just done, because as Hannah and I we've moved on, if you like, to the Adoption and Names project. But so I've got a kind of lot of balls in the air. But I am really pushing the Students' Names project and its findings as far as I can, both within my own university and trying to get impact in other universities. So, for example, your old University of Leicester.
Yeah.
I've got a contact there. I've shared the findings with them, and the senior leadership team, as a consequence of the research that Hannah and I did, have now added audio name badges to their email signatures. They're leading from the top.
Brilliant.
And they're hoping to kind of get that filtered down across the whole university. So change is coming slowly but surely, but it is a bit of a juggle trying to kind of run a new project when you're trying to still kind of get the recognition for the previous one.
And Hannah, what's the vision for you?
Well, I think more widely, as Jane said, with the EDI focus in universities, I think all universities are so big on EDI statements, EDI promises and commitments for the next 5 years. This is what we'll do in our EDI promise till 2025 and things like that. I think names are such a, not easy, but such a basic part of that. I hope that universities will sort of see what we've done and think this is quite a visible way of actually practically doing something, because some of the students and even the staff we spoke to sort of said, we've got this big EDI statement. I'm not actually sure what that looks like. That's not what it looks like from our perspective, some of the students. So I hope that it will be sort of taken on by some of these EDI projects and actually make a practical difference rather than just a sort of statement on a website kind of approach.
Well, let's aim for that. If you are listening to this podcast and you are a member of staff at a university, make sure you send the link to your VC and put it right in front of them and share this knowledge with them. Because also, Jane, you mentioned you shared some papers with Leicester. If you could share those papers with me, we'll put them in the description below as well, because it's all about that sharing of learning. This has been a fantastic conversation that for me has opened up a lot of ideas in my head about what I can do in my work, but also in my personal life, because I feel a little bit blunt saying it's Cavan, but I need to work on saying it with confidence and with strength, because it is Cavan. It is not anything else. You rename me. Exactly. So I will own it and I will claim that. So thank you very much for your time.
I'm going to get rid of my nickname.
Yeah?
And I'm going to go back to my full name.
What is it? Own it.
Rachel.
Love that. And that has been Before Our Friends Die with me, Cavan, and
me, Rachel.
Love that. And thank you so much to our guests, Hannah and Jane. Like I said, the links will be in the description below. This has been Before Our Friends Die on the Akhi&saltfish Digital Network. If you need to get in touch with us, please email akhi&saltfish@gmail.com, as well as social media, akhi&saltfish and Before Our Friends Die pod on Instagram. It's been fantastic. I really appreciate you listening. Don't forget to share this with a friend and leave us a 5-star review. It really helps us out. Until next time, take care. And don't forget, by the way, to tune in next week for what? Get to know Jane and Hannah.
Yes.
Take care. See you later.